Welcome to the Control Engineering Webcast, Exploring Industrial Wireless Best Practices, sponsored by Honeywell and Quectel. I'm your moderator, Mark Hosky, and I'm happy to join you today on behalf of Control Engineering and CFE Media and Technology. CFE Media has met the standards and requirements of the Registered Continuing Education Program. Credit earned on completion of this program will be reported to RCEP at rcep.net. A certificate of completion will be issued to each participant. As such, it does not include content that may be deemed or construed to be an approval or endorsement by RCEP. So what is the best mix for industrial wireless applications to support current and future needs with 5G and 4G technologies and the 3G and 2G cellular wireless phase-outs, IEEE 802.11 Wi-Fi, IEEE 802.15 Bluetooth, proprietary wireless networks, wireless devices, sensor networks, and widely enforced standards in the mix, along with the endpoint solutions. Do you know what's being used in your facilities? What are the policies, procedures, and cybersecurity measures? Stay with us, because we're going to look at these learning objectives. We're going to determine the maturity level, current, future plans for industrial wireless, look to examine technologies and standards for industrial wireless, learn to create migration lifecycle plans for industrial wireless, consider industrial wireless cybersecurity best practices, and look at industrial wireless case studies and lessons learned. To get the best results from the webcast platform, please make note of the following as you participate in today's event. If you're having technical problems, click on the question mark at the top right corner of the screen to bring up a list of system checks to make before escalating to an online technician. If you're experiencing issues with your slides or audio, please refresh your browser or click the Refresh Media button directly under the presenter's headshot. You can control the volume settings of the webcast by adjusting the volume on your computer or by adjusting the volume on the webcast platform. If you need a technician, type a message into the Ask a Question box and someone will get to you as quickly as possible. Answers to your technical questions will be in the Answered Questions box on the left-hand side of the screen. You can use the Ask a Question box on the left side of the screen to type questions for the speakers during the presentation for the Q&A session at the end. You may ask questions at any time during the presentation, and we'll get to as many as time allows. Questions that are for today's presenters will be answered verbally during the Q&A session at the end of the webcast. To download the presentation slides, use the Event Resources area on the left side of the screen. To take the Learning Unit exam, use the Learning Unit exam tab option at the top of the screen. The exam will open in a new browser window. You can complete the exam after the webcast, however, the link will break when the webcast signs off. The exam will be posted with the on-demand version of the webcast. The exam is for one RCEP ACEC Certified Professional Development Hour. The webcast is being recorded, including the Q&A session, and we'll post the archive on the Control Engineering website in a few days, and we'll send you an email to a link to the archive once it's ready. The method of delivery and category. The event is considered a live educational webcast presented on July 8th, 2021. The educational category is technical, health, and safety. So we'll pause here for a word from our sponsors. Please stay tuned. After the video, there may be a short pause to compensate for varying internet speeds, and then we'll rejoin you.
Quectel Wireless Solutions was first to bring 5G wireless modules to the global market, enabling high-speed, low-latency connectivity. Our 5G modules are helping to build a smarter world, and the new white paper reveals 6 early use cases. On the road, our modules provide secure, reliable, and intelligent driver assistance and automation. In agriculture, our modules provide farmers with more data to help increase crop yields. The benefits of our 5G modules can also be applied to the manufacturing industry with advanced factory automation and personnel saving. New wave of hyperconnected 5G devices, which all utilize a smart wireless module, are now poised to create smarter cities, hospitals, schools, and businesses. Visit our website now to download the 5G white paper. Quectel Wireless Solutions is helping everyone to build a smarter world.
Well, I'm happy to introduce today's distinguished speakers, Lori Cavanaugh, Business Development Manager of eTechnologies Group, and Dean Franzen, CIM Manager, CEC Controls with Wood. With more than 30 years' experience in system integration, Lori Cavanaugh focuses on the right problems, solving the right problems to deliver the most value to manufacturing and process customers. Her practice is rooted in the power of creating partnerships with customers from the start of the problem-solution journey through implementation and ongoing support. In an expanding role as Business Development Manager for eTechnologies Group, Cavanaugh is connecting with existing and new customers in various industries to bridge the IT/OT gap with collaborative assessment and remediation solutions to address cybersecurity and business continuity needs. With more than 400 technical team members across 15 U.S. offices, she represents a team that can respond to larger and more diverse projects, acting as a guide for industrial clients seeking to plan and execute their digital transformation strategy. eTechnologies Group expanded its geographic reach and subject matter expertise by uniting several U.S. engineering companies, eTechnologies, Glenmount Global Solutions, Superior Controls, and Banks Integration Group to give clients access to engineering resources with deep domain expertise. Dean Franzen is the Global Technical Lead for Applied Intelligence Manufacturing Automation at Wood, or for short, CIM Manager, CEC Controls Wood. He has more than 25 years experience in automation and edge computing for manufacturing. He's active in supporting the Industry 4.0 architecture with automotive original equipment manufacturers. He was the technical lead from Wood on Ford error-proofing application across Ford global footprint. Franzen leads a department of hardware and software engineers that can provide large-scale edge computing solutions to industrial Internet of Things devices, pushing telemetry data to the cloud. I'm Mark Hosky, Control Engineering Editor, Content Manager since 1994, serving as moderator. Over to you, Lori.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I would just like to say a quick shout out to the sponsor, because that video in the beginning just really nailed what we're here to talk about. And so let me get started. Our agenda for today is Dean and I collaborated and we said, what's the best way to meet those learning objectives? And it's like, let's talk about what are the wireless platforms that are really in play today. So the video from the sponsor kind of showed you some use cases and things that Dean's going to be able to talk about later. Those aren't just mock-up, videos. Those are real-life applications in place today. So there really are great opportunities out there for you to start using wireless if you're still young in your journey for wireless. For those of you that might be more advanced, we are going to talk a little bit about wireless then as a corporate strategy. And I do have a case study example from one of our customers, how they embraced wireless and is a strategy, not only a strategy, but then defining the platform and the policies that are going to take them into the future. So just reiterating again, those learning objectives, in breaking the presentation down into these three main groups, we are going to be able to deliver on these learning objectives. Looking forward to questions too at the end, but let me move forward. So let's talk a little bit about wireless today, right? So what's really driving the use of wireless? Well, Probably no surprise, right? As soon as you have a computer in your hand, you started to see a huge acceleration in the demand by consumers. So it's not just consumers, in our homes, but also in the industrial workplace. How are we going to solve problems? So it's those browser-based native applications. We expect information to be delivered to us in the moment. So that is definitely driving the need for wireless. Safety and efficiency. If there is a confined space, if there's a hard to get to area, but we need to get information from an asset or a piece of equipment, it's critical to the efficiency of our operation. How do we now engage a wireless sensor or device or a wireless topology to allow us to collect that information in a safe way and then allow us to be more efficient in the work that we do? Augmented reality, we see it, we hear about it, but think about for a second, in the old days, we used to do on-the-job training, and you would have mentorship, right? You would stand next to somebody, you would watch them perform a work function, and then maybe you'd get a chance to do the same thing, repair a piece of equipment. Now, what if you were the one that was guided? So it's your hands, but you're guided now by an overlay, a system overlay that's going to take you through the process. Now you're building that muscle memory directly versus somebody speaking over your shoulder. So on-the-job training has a whole new flavor now, and the ability to do the learning curve or reduce the learning curve is greatly enhanced. Dashboards in our hands, again, back to mobile devices. So it's not so much to have that dashboard up on a wall or, you've seen the paper trail, you walk into a facility, and that's great. We need those metrics and we need that information, we need those analytics. But what if they were right in the moment and our team meeting was out on the floor, out in the field, and we're collaborating real time with the data and information that says, here's what just happened an hour ago, last shift, how are we going to pivot, how are we going to make a difference? So that, again, is bottom-up driving change and demand for wireless. And the last thing is a term you may or may not be familiar with is gamification. So our workforce, starting in their 30s on down, have been exposed to gaming systems, right? Things that there was no instruction manual when they got a new game. It was I'm just going to dive in and start kind of navigating around, and I'll figure it out, and then I'll maybe coordinate, and I'll do a live chat with somebody that knows the gaming system, or maybe even do a YouTube video or a channel where they're talking about the game. So they're used to collaboration. This younger workforce is coming in saying, where is that in the industrial space? Where's my mobile device? Where's that information coming to me real time? Huge driver. So what? So what are we going to do about it, and how are we going to create an enabling platforms to allow for that communication and mobility and the wireless kind of adoption? I'm going to talk about 4 key platforms. Dean's going to then take over and talk about use cases. So we're all familiar with IEEE 802.11 standards. So this is the Wi-Fi, right? We're used to it in our homes. We're used to it out in the workplace. But quite frankly, what it used to be is it's a large footprint. Once you get it in place, everybody's great, set it and forget it. It's the last time OT has to see the IT people come in, right? No, they don't bother us anymore. Well, that's changing a little bit now, right? So it does have broad coverage. We are able to do multi-point, as this graphic shows, but there are gaps. And so that does have to be managed. And as you see with the lettering sequence, there are different evolutions. So now you start to intermix firmware versions, and that has to be managed in terms of what's the life cycle of this 802.11 network, and how are we going to adapt it moving forward. The other thing that's really key, though, about 802.11 is because it's been around for a while, it is a global standard. That's really critical for our customers, right, who have multi-country facilities, and you're trying to create one corporate strategy, but then allow for deployment specific to those areas. So there are governing bodies, there are spectrums that have to be adhered to. Again, I think Dean's going to have some discussions on that in his case study, so it's always good to hear from someone that's in the trenches, day to day on implementing some of these technologies. So that covers sort of the Wi-Fi. What about cellular? So cellular also has had its evolution. Again, we started having a computer in our hands, so now it was the ability of from 2G, 3G, how are these cellular towers and different providers going to play nicely together? So over time, they started to kind of figure that out. These are great for geographically dispersed types of applications where I don't have a line of sight, and it's not cost effective to, bury a cable and run a wire. It'll allow us to traverse public and private space. So it's easy to implement a wireless technology if you own the property. If you now need to move, across miles, then cellular is probably going to be one of your best options. There's a little bit of extra information here, so I'm going to take a second, but basically, Mark had alluded to this, that there's going to be phase outs of the 2G and 3G. And for those customers who adopted a cellular wireless technology platform application, you got to start planning ahead, right? How are we going to now evolve that, move it, or is there a way to maybe still leverage or utilize some of the older technologies and put a middleware component there that will then bridge that 2G, 3G communication into the 4G, LTE, and the 5G communication. So the 5G technologies vary. I think, again, I go back to, our sponsor and the promotional video, and they were talking about 5G wasn't just a technology, it was an enabler, right? So they were showing applications for a farmer in the field trying to better manage crops, somebody in the industrial space trying to troubleshoot or manage equipment when maybe the equipment builder is in Germany or in another, one of the Asian countries, and they're trying to provide that support in different time zones. So it's pretty exciting times now, but you do maybe need a little bit of a tour guide to help you through navigating all of these different platforms. Bluetooth, again, Mark mentioned this as well. So Bluetooth for us, we think about it because I'm using a wireless mouse, I've got a wireless headset. We can all relate to it on a personal level, and it does have a very small footprint, but in the industrial space, this can actually be really helpful, especially in hybrid applications where you can get frequency interference. So, and that's why you have to understand the spectrum and the bands that you're working within. But with Bluetooth naturally being a lower bandwidth, a lower frequency, it works really well in this hybrid Bluetooth and Wi-Fi environment. So an example of that might be we've got, a worker or a group of workers in a work cell, and they have an application specific to that work cell function, and maybe 40 feet away, there's another work cell. They can all be equipped with the Bluetooth enabling technologies, but they won't interfere with each other, and nor will they interfere with the data that's being aggregated through the Wi-Fi network. And then finally, some of you may or may not be familiar with Zigbee, but Zigbee is a way to create a wireless mesh network. Say that fast 5 times. So the wireless mesh network, so similar to the graphic I showed before on Wi-Fi, what it allows is a way to canvas an area and possibly not have those gaps or dips. It's different if I've got a forklift driver that's moving from one building to the next, but what if I have sensors and things like that that are embedded in those gap areas? The mesh network allows better coverage and allows for those wireless devices and sensors and controls to not have intermittent communication problems. This is also used globally. So again, for those folks out there in the audience who have locations and facilities in other countries and other areas, one common standard or approach or policy might have to have some configuration differences, but you can still use the same kind of network infrastructure. It does have some capabilities to do line of sight and get some distance geographically in outdoor settings, again, depending on line of sight or obstructions in the space, environmental conditions. But thinking, about the farmer and some of the new technologies coming out for even small farmers as well as the industrial farms is being able to provide that sensor information on, do I need to water the field? What's my nutrient levels? So you're building, you're basically not trying to apply a standard policy or a standard approach to growing. You're responding to the needs of the farm and the environment and the crops. So pretty cool technology as well. This is also something that can enable that Bluetooth communication up or the industrial Internet of Things types of edge devices and sensors. So part of my initial intro into what we're talking about was to sort of set the stage for these platforms. I think I'm going to be handing it over now. Back to you, Mark. We're going to do an audience poll, I believe.
Yes, thanks very much, Lori. Appreciate the technology review. This is a great time to assess where the audience is with a poll question that should now be appearing on your screen. We'll discuss the results right before the Q&A session to wrap that in and provide some additional advice. So please share what best describes your organization's maturity level. The maturity level for industrial wireless applications. So first answer is we have no industrial wireless installations. We have some industrial wireless installations. We have considerable industrial wireless installations. And number 4, most advanced, we have updated, optimized industrial wireless installations. Now, of course, you might be at one stage with plans to progress to the next stage, or without any plans to progress. But this gives us an opportunity to see where we're at among those listening live to this webcast today. And for those listening to the archive, you get to assess where some of your peers are. So please consider that along with your how you're thinking about industrial wireless and your maturity level within your organization. We're going to let that go for a few more seconds and then get back to the presentation. So thanks to everyone who will answer the poll, and we'll get to the results right before the Q&A session at the end. And now we'll move back to the presentation. Lori? Are we moving off to Dean? Yes, Dean.
Yep. Yeah, I was going to say we're moving on to Dean. Yep.
All right, I'll take over from here. So, hi, everyone. My name is Dean Franson, and I'd like to start by reviewing and talking about some case studies. And these are real-world projects that I've been involved with where we've got some lessons learned and want to kind of talk about how we've implemented these systems, how we've, what security measures we've taken, and things to look out for. So one of the first things that that I want to highlight is, and just one second, I'm having an issue seeing the slide.
I got you, Dean. So I think what happens sometimes when we do the surveys, it toggles you over to the different tab, but right there on the slide tab, I'm going to go ahead and kind of, you got it right there? Use cases, lessons learned on the Wi-Fi.
Yeah, I got it now.
All right.
Sorry about that.
No, you're good.
There we go. Okay. So, so one of the first case studies I want to review with everyone is how we've been able to take a fulfillment system. So we're talking about pick-to-light systems, mobile devices that are helping operators fulfill products. And in a manufacturing industrial space, often these are mobile solutions. These are people and operators that need to walk great distances through marketplaces and deliver product from marketplace to line side. So we've gone ahead and implemented these systems using a methodology that incorporates primarily Wi-Fi. Because we're inside the four walls of an industrial space, we're leveraging what's already in place. Now, what have we learned? So how do we deal with things like encryption and authentication when you're using Wi-Fi? In an industrial space, very often you're using the corporate Wi-Fi, so you want to be careful about partitioning parts of the Wi-Fi for, maybe for manufacturing. If you're sharing, maybe you need to, maybe you're incorporating the corporate infrastructure. So knowing about the the corporate encryption methods, authentication methods. Also understanding how you're using your mobile devices. Things like a mobile device wants to save power. So you need to be careful about how those devices are set up. Do you want them turned on and left on all the time to remain connected? Are you interested in considering and engineering a solution where you know your operator needs to work a 10-hour shift or a 12-hour shift, and they're using a mobile device? So these are things that we've looked at and incorporated in our solutions, and you need to think about as well. So in the case of encryption authentication, what does the corporate solution require? Is it using a public key, a public share key like a PSK? Are you using LEAP or PEEP, which are the solutions that are that a lot of corporations are using if you're using corporate authentication, where you're using maybe your personal credentials for the corporation, and you want to grant roles and those sorts of things. In terms of lessons learned, number one key, site evaluation. You've got to understand what the wireless looks like in the space. You need to know where you have dead spots. You need to know where other wireless is being implemented. And the other thing is understanding regional settings. I've had a customer that's got a global footprint. They're located in the United States, so they've deployed a US-centric solution, right? Everyone wants to standardize, so they just, they deployed a US-centric standard. But when you end up in another country and you're using wireless standards, you end up with potentially a problem with that region or another region because they say their standards aren't quite the same. In particular, Wi-Fi, the channel range in the US is different than, say, the channel range in Japan, where the Wi-Fi spectrum is actually larger and there are more channels available. So these are things to know. So when you're in another country or deploying in other places, how Wi-Fi can impact your solution. Cellular. Well, we've done some Internet of Things solutions, and one of the great things about cellular, in this case, I've got an OEM that builds cars, and they're parking cars in fields. And we all have heard about chip shortage. And so the OEMs are building their cars without these chips, and they're putting them basically in fields. So what does cellular offer us? It offers us a pretty quick and easy solution. There's no infrastructure costs, right? There's, you can take mobile solutions that have cellular chips in them, and as long as you have software, you have connectivity. So this is a quick and easy way to kind of track vehicles. We want to know what field my vehicle's in. We want to know what is wrong with the vehicle. What parts are missing? So, what are some of the issues? Well, how do you cross over from the corporate, sort of a public network using, public carrier, and having kind of corporate connectivity? So you have to understand how you're going to make those connections. Are you using a VPN? Are you, does your customer have a method to punch through, say, whatever firewall that they have in place that keeps the public side out and lets you in? And of course, you have cellular carriers to be worried about. Really, based on where you're parking these cars, do you have coverage? Do you need a multi-carrier solution? So other things to consider. What have we learned from this process? We found that there are solutions out there. For example, there are SIM cards that allow multi-carrier coverage. So you're not locked in. You have almost an agnostic solution. You don't have to be beholden to one carrier. You can actually, buy into a package that gives you coverage not only across multiple carriers, but even multiple countries. And the other thing to be very keenly aware of is keeping up with standards. One of the things that we've come across is this problem where, especially as an Internet of Things solution, where you're really interested in maybe some simple telemetry, and you don't need a ton of bandwidth, or even latency isn't a problem for you. Well, that's all great, but if the carrier is moving on from LTE 4G to 5G, and you're using a 2G, 3G chip in your IoT device, you might have connectivity issues. So the cost isn't great, but you might have to think about, I need to upgrade my standards on my hardware to make sure that at least my carrier will provide a robust connection to my device. All right, Bluetooth. Here, when it comes to engineering solutions, Bluetooth is a great hybrid solution that works with other wireless technologies. I see a lot of wireless tools, a lot of wireless like low power solutions that kind of fit under the Wi-Fi umbrella. So you have this sort of mixed space where even we all know that Wi-Fi can exist in the 2.4 gigahertz space, which is where Bluetooth lives, and also the 5 gigahertz space primarily. And if you ignore the 5 gigahertz space for one moment and just say everything is in this 4 or 2.4 gigahertz space, it's a noisy space. Microwave ovens live there. Zigbee is there. You've got all this all this potential interference. What's nice about Bluetooth and Wi-Fi is with the lower power, you can really define work cells and have them live inside that like low power space, and then have Wi-Fi kind of coexist where you have maybe data-driven, payloads where where the Wi-Fi is supporting one type of data flow, and then your wireless Bluetooth is a different type, more maybe results-based, discrete-based, that sort of thing. So what are the benefits? Of course, low power, as I mentioned. Bluetooth is great because it's got its own sort of robust connectivity based on multi-hop technology. So it's a really good technology for within that low power space for remaining connected to whatever sort of host client spaces for Bluetooth. It does a really good job of sort of hopping around to finding where the space is in the wireless just to remain connected. So I'm a big fan of it, but I'm also a huge fan of, you need to be careful. You need to do your site studies. You need to understand what appliances are using what part of your wireless space. Again, lessons learned can coexist with other 2.4 gigahertz devices. And something to be aware of, power save. Again, so many wireless devices, are battery based, and as we know, these devices will try to shut themselves off. And if they shut themselves off to protect and save the battery, what happens to your connection? What happens to your application in that instance? You need to think about those kinds of things. In my Zigbee example, we have a project working in a shipyard where we were using an IoT device that was measuring some temperature and humidity readings in the shipbuilding process. So we're measuring, in essence, as paint was curing in a tight space in the hull of a ship, looking at collecting some data. And the traditional sort of approach would have been manually measuring these temperatures and recording them, by hand, or maybe transferring them into an Excel spreadsheet. Now we're able to drop some IoT devices into these spaces and collect this data. Now, because it's on a ship, we were looking at different wireless technologies and found that Zigbee was the better choice for this application because of the mesh network. Zigbee offers a very sort of flexible and easy to set up mesh, and that mesh provided the robustness we wanted out of our network, because it didn't need a big footprint. It didn't need to be. It didn't need to be. It wasn't in an open field. It wasn't in under the four walls and roof of a traditional manufacturing space. But we were able to kind of connect all these devices and then talk to a primary host, computer. So what are the issues encountered and the benefits? obviously, this solution offered a great way to automate the process of collecting data, and did offer us a fairly large, and in this case, a temporary footprint. As you can imagine, building, in this case, once the curing process was done on building a ship, we could take these devices away, put them on a shelf, and then bring them back for the next, the next product that was being built. What did we learn? That in this case, the solution was great because the mesh network provided a very reliable network to connect all these devices. We could drop many devices in the ship and have them reliably communicate with each other. And it was very easy to set up. Now, cybersecurity. Encryption and authentication. These are the two big topics, right? So how are we going to connect our, protect our data? And how are we, in some cases, the use cases vary. So we've talked about IoT type solutions, but we've also, if you think about, there's a lot of ways that you can move data. You can have mobile computing solutions. We talked about gamification. So you can easily envision an iPad type of, a tablet-based solution. Well, how is an operator interacting with that data? Do they have to log in? How do they log in? So we're talking, maybe thin client, maybe connectivity over Wi-Fi. So SSL and TLS, private and public encryption keys, pretty standard corporate implementations. We're almost most familiar with that technology, of course, when we're at home and we're maybe doing online shopping. If you're on banking, those sorts of things. We all know that we have a secure connection, and this is securing the network. We also are familiar with maybe our home networks, in maybe a private solution, or we know PSKs are say the key that you use to define your wireless router. Something that's, you might have a solution where it's a proof of concept, or it's not maybe a corporate solution, but it's something that you want to deploy as a small solution. You're going to want to protect your network using some sort of PSK. The use of LEAP or PEEP or kind of EAP technology. So we're talking about, again, an authentication where you're using corporate credentials. You're using a third-party solution or a third-party server, but you're hitting, let's say, you're hitting a single, using single login type technology, right? Where you're using your already known corporate logins to log into the wireless. It's authenticating that you're a valid user, but it also has the advantage of passing roles and credentials. As I state here, kind of a need to know architecture, right? If you're being granted access to the corporate network wirelessly, we want to protect that, or Active Directory kind of roles might come into play here as well. And then, of course, we're all very familiar with, or we're all hearing a lot about sort of Industry 4.0 or IoT technologies, edge computing. And so we're starting to see, of course, the proliferation of with cloud computing, that the cloud players are offering additional sources or resources for using their solutions. So we're not only just looking at encrypting just how the network portion, but even encrypting the data on the local machines. So these, the online cloud computing companies are offering a full suite of software solutions that not only allow you to develop solutions on your IoT devices, but they're offering the deployment strategies, or offering, security strategies. So, these sorts of things are now being common, or being more common, used more commonplace. We're starting to use more of this in our edge devices as well. And this is another way to provision your solution in a secure way, as I mentioned, and protecting the data, not only over the network, but actually on the device.
I think this is where I kind of jump in and take on over, Dean, but that was great. I mean, I'm interested to see how the poll, what the poll numbers show in terms of maturity, because after you start to see the use cases, you might say, I thought I was a lot more mature in my wireless use than maybe we are, in, from a corporate standpoint. But that's okay, because no matter where you are in your journey, there's always new things to learn, and there's going to be continuing and evolving technologies. So what I wanted to talk about is we're going to switch now to wireless as a corporate strategy. And so if you recall earlier, we talked about the bottom-up drivers to industrial wireless, right? So I want to use a mobile phone, mobile device. But what if now the executive who got that Ring doorbell for Christmas and thinks it's the coolest thing that they can now see, the video on their phone, and it's like, why are we not using this everywhere in the organization? Chances are you may be using it in pockets, but how do we now start to drive that as a corporate strategy? So executives like to talk about money. So what is the return on investment? Well, mobility is going to increase efficiency. It's going to increase uptime. The sooner I can know, have information at the ready for, I've got somebody, where that asset is, and they're reporting back what's really going on. I can send the right people, the right tools. So now my mean time to repair is reduced, and possibly the data that's collected and aggregated in those kind of that micro data now starts to give me a better picture of that asset. And so my mean time to repair gets extended because I'm able to use real-time information from that equipment and from my people that are enabled. What about safety, right? Safety is really critical in our industrial workspace. And so how do we, Dean talked about some examples where you got the shipyard, and, before they were trying to lower something down between the holes, and, that's not a safe environment. Or you might have an asset that's maybe located or mounted, in a high area in a facility, and it's like, rather than having to harness up and go up there and take a reading, can't we just enable that equipment to speak to us from that remote location? The augmented reality, I talked about it from on-the-job training perspective, but there is a lot of augmented reality being experimented with for reducing setup time. So for those of us I work a lot in the manufacturing industrial space, and also water, wastewater, we might be, having to go to a piece of equipment to do some mechanical setups and some other things, and then have to walk back to where that operator interface is. Well, why don't we bring that interface in an augmented manner right in front of where that operator is interfacing? So that way we're now reducing those footsteps. And you think, what's 5 or 6 steps? But it's a minute. All of a sudden that adds up, right? You're running, three shifts a day. So it could be, another way to bring that interface to the people that need it. The in-hand dashboards that I mentioned before, again, collaborative, real-time analytical data, lessons learned, but we're right there in the moment where we can now apply, pivot, do whatever we need to do. And then the gamification. Let's not only attract the workforce, how about we retain them, right? So again, we've got a younger workforce coming in saying, and it's not that it doesn't have to be gadgety, it doesn't have to be, like that, but there has to be they're expecting, they're going to interface with something, it's going to give them feedback, there's going to be a response. So that it's more that back and forth. That's what workers want to be, get engaged with. So how do we bring some of those technologies to bear in the operation? And then the reduced learning curve, time is money. So that being said, we've got the bottom up, we've got the top down, and it always meets in the middle. So if any of you saw my presentation or when I co-presented on accelerating digital transformation, it was almost like a therapy session, right? So the middle where it meets is the IT and OT. And we all know that it's tricky getting everybody in the room together, but I contend that, the acknowledgement, agreement, action, and accountability are key. So, yep. The network is not the only thing that needs to mesh in this environment. So we need to mesh our key people internally. And remember, the enemy is not within. So the enemy is outside the organization trying to get in, breach, cause havoc. And manufacturing, industrial space, process, that's the new target, because that's where I always say the money is printed, right? The money is not printed by people being able to send emails in the front office. That's where the money's counted. It's where we're delivering a service, manufacturing a product. That's where being held hostage is painful. So we do have to collaborate and work together. You have to decide, is wireless the end or the means to the end? So is the wireless technology the actual solution itself and how that all integrates and works together? Or is it a transport mechanism? Is it a means to getting the information from one point to another? So determining that and really agreeing on what is it. How are we going to act? How are we going to create something that's a flexible, agile framework or set of policies? And then, how are we going to secure it? And also who's going to then be responsible for it, which would be the fourth A, right? The accountability. How are we going to monitor this? How are we going to respond to situations? And who owns that responsibility? So what I wanted to do is I always think it's kind of neat to look at an actual real case study of what a company has done to accomplish this. So we have one of our customers, a global consumer packaged goods manufacturer, and realizing that wireless wasn't going to go away and every plant and operation was kind of doing pieces and parts of it, they thought, you know what, let's make this an actual strategy. So they acknowledged, hey, this is important. Wireless is going to be an advantage to us because of all those reasons that I mentioned. The executive suite kind of saw what the ROI could be in implementing some of these. And in Dean's examples, some of these technologies aren't extremely expensive to get set up, or you can quickly, get them set up, and especially if you've got a predefined protocol or policy to do it. So they created a diverse team internally, and they also acknowledged that they did not have the depth of knowledge in this overall wireless landscape. So they hired outside consultants, fairly expensive ones, to help them build the strategy around how they were going to implement their wireless. They then said, okay, what do we agree on in terms of a long-term approach and how we're going to do this? So they, in their control infrastructure strategy, always had a modular mindset. How do we define a set of standards and tell all of our OEMs how to build their control, structures? So why not apply that to wireless? So they settled on a major cloud provider and created a standard cloud-based wireless platform. And that could be a base platform. And then depending on the application and the site and the needs, they would have modular plugins that would help manage those wireless technologies. So what they did is they took an open source platform application that could do that monitoring, traffic management, so that they would know what the traffic patterns were and what the information that was being shared on that network, and then plugged in whether it was going to be a Zigbee or if there was IoT, if there's Bluetooth, edge devices. So they started to build out these modular frames or plugins for the policies and procedures. Also, they were able to start using machine learning to develop traffic patterns. So they would know that in the Zigbee mesh network, first shift, second shift, third shift, these are the patterns and the flow. So then they could start to say, okay, over time, if we start to see exceptions to that, that's what we're going to alert to. That's what we're going to alarm on. And then who's going to handle that? And that would be that final piece, right? The accountability. Who then accounts for handling those exceptions as they come up? So that was their approach, and it was a stepping stone approach, but the idea was enable, but don't not have a policy, don't not make it a strategy, actually commit to that and then enforce that. So Dean, I think you're going to join me on this next slide because you're going to, I think, just kind of bring it home with just some final thoughts.
Right.
I'll let you control. Yeah.
There we go. Right. So as an engineer, I understand your problem, right? What are you trying to solve? This is the key. Understand what are your inputs and your outputs. Perform some kind of assessment. You have to understand, with wireless in particular, understand what what you have and what you don't have. It's hard to tell, especially without an assessment, where your blind spots are, when it comes to especially Wi-Fi. But understanding that different technologies offer different solutions. You don't have to have a one-size-fits-all solution. It's not always just a Wi-Fi solution or just a cellular. They can all coexist. And then also identify your short and long-term security needs. As I mentioned before, we're talking about, as Lori really stated, there's a lot greater emphasis now on cybersecurity. You want to understand where you're vulnerable. And in some cases, the assessment will tell you quite simply, it's like this piece of data, I don't care, right? It's a result. It's not vulnerable to our solution, and others highly vulnerable. We don't want this, information known, or it can cause our facility to shut down. We need to implement something that will protect to protect the business. And so you need to identify these things and then assess them and then provide the appropriate solution.
And Dean, haven't you found sometimes too, when you're going out, like sometimes even our customers didn't realize that they had left a door open, like a new piece of equipment came in, they thought it was great because the vendor said, hey, we can monitor this remotely through this web app. And IT didn't know. And, it was just one of those things where it's like, so sometimes there's definitely, it's accidental. It's the not knowing. So if anything, one of the takeaways hopefully today is that you're now armed with better questions to ask, right, internally.
Yeah, and sometimes security seems to be the last thing on everyone's list. As an engineer, you're solution based, right? So you're driving toward collecting the data, engineering, the flow or the application, and you're not thinking security, and it just has to be an equal partner in your projects. Next item, selecting partners and technologies with successful deployments to assist throughout the process. I don't think any of us have done projects alone. Everything that our company has done in partnership with often the client, but very often the other technology partners, and everyone brings something to the table. As I mentioned in a project I was involved with earlier, where the wireless settings were set up incorrectly for say a US-based deployment. That's such a subtle thing. Nobody's looking for that. But when your solution doesn't work, if you have connectivity issues, you're reliant on a team to help find these things out. And of course, you'll never forget, when the issues like this happen, well, that's the great thing, isn't it? You'll never forget about these kinds of issues.
For sure. Those lessons learned, it's like we all have the scars to show for it. And I think, I'm sorry, there is one last little bullet.
No, the rapid nature of change within wireless, and especially security. There's always going to be lessons learned. There's always going to, we're just always going to be continually learning. We always know, that the next technologies are going to provide greater access, more data, and security itself is always ever changing. So it's something to be mindful of, is that what you did 10 years ago is not going to cut it. What I did last week may not cut it. It's something we have to continually work at.
For sure. So I think, Mark, that wraps up what we were going to cover. And
great. Thanks so much, Dean and Lori, for your presentations. As promised, here are the results from the audience poll. Before we get to the audience questions, could each of you add a bit of advice to help people move more efficiently to a higher maturity level for industrial wireless? I'll let people look at their results and hear your advice.
Dean, you want to start, or you want me to go? I never lack for advice. You can ask anybody that knows me, but I just go back to that whole assess where you're really at without judgment, though. There are a lot of new technologies, new things happening all the time and evolving in this wireless space. So really, let the guard down. IT and OT have to come together and really just understand how to collaborate, because the ultimate winner is the organization, right? There's all those benefits that I mentioned in terms of higher efficiencies and throughput and safety. So it's worth it. Dean?
Yeah, my advice is, again, assessing is huge, understanding what your wireless space looks like, but also note that, like, I'm a big fan of traditional wired as well as the wireless. I think that every solution has some mix of both. It's never a one size fits all. I know that there's a real tendency at times to just go, we're going to build a new facility. We're going to go all in with wireless. We're going to save a ton of money because we don't have to install any drops and switches and all these things. And not to say that isn't possible. It's just, I find that the ultimate solution is some mix of both, and the assessment process will help you get there.
Great. Thanks so much. So the audience listening live can type questions for today's presenters in the Ask a Question box on the screen. We'll get to as many questions as time allows. Within a few days, the presentation will be available for on-demand viewing, along with a link to the quiz for potential PDH credit. So we'll post the archive on the Control Engineering website, send you an email message with a link connecting to it when the related resources are ready. And now we have time for a few questions. So let's quickly move to the first one. Please give some advice for developing a site standard for industrial wireless.
Is that you, Dean, or you want me to go?
Go ahead. You can start. I just want to think about that one for a second.
Yeah, the site standard. So I kind of go to, depends on the size of your organization, right? So if you are a site in a multi-site organization, but you feel like you're a leader in that space, then step forward and say, hey, we feel that these have been advantageous, but there is a limit to where, like Dean was saying, it takes a team, right? And so you need to probably engage some additional resources, maybe from corporate, or maybe that's been kind of the roadblock, as IT needs to now, weigh in, reach out and embrace it, but then become the case study, the internal case study for the how to do it, the best practices. Because as you do that, then you will be part of that kind of inner circle of where that wireless goes for the future. So if you've got a good use case, you understand the business benefits, so you're speaking the language of the execs that hold the money, step forward. Don't wait.
Good. And so we'll get to one more question here, and please others submit the questions and we'll get to them offline. So do system integrators still talk with clients about wired versus wireless? We mentioned that a little bit. How do you help decide when you have a new project?
Dean, I'm going to let you take that one, because you
Right.
just hit on that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yes, I would say yes. I mean, I think in a team setting, I think you start with what you want or want to try to achieve, and then you through the engineering process and assessment process, you make those recommendations. If you feel wired is the better way to go, then you have to have that communication. If wireless makes sense, of course, I think, and the customer wants wireless, then we go that route as well. I want to say that, as an integrator, I'm probably not saying anything that anyone else doesn't know, but, you're more apt to give the customer what they want. Okay. You're going to lean toward, if the customer wants wireless, I'm giving them wireless. And if we fail, we fail. Okay. That I don't believe in that strategy, but I do believe that we're aligned with giving the customer what they want more often than being, saying no. But anyone who's done an assessment and understands the risk involved will have a voice and will ultimately provide a robust and successful project solution.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks everyone for the great questions. As we wrap up, please continue to submit them and we'll get to as many offline as we can. Thanks again to our presenters for their insights and answers. Lori Cavanaugh, Business Development Manager of eTechnologies Group, and Dean Franzen, Applied Intelligence with Wood. And thanks again to our sponsors, Honeywell and Quectel. Now that we're just about done, we want your feedback. A short survey will pop up on the screen as soon as the webcast ends. Please take a moment to complete it as we use this information to improve our webcasts. Finally, on behalf of Control Engineering and CFE Media and Technology, thanks for attending. This concludes our webcast. Thank you and goodbye.